You're listening to the Eclectrocasts podcast. This is podcast number 36. This Eclectrocasts podcast features USA-based curator, fan, supporter, and promoter of indie music Tracy Perry, who operates the weekly online radio show Tracy's Expansion of Presence. Expansion of Presence is an oral journey across genres, presenting unsigned artists and new artists. We talked with Tracy about how she came to do this show and how she curates the tracks she uses and the order in which she plays them. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Eclectrocasts. This is Jeff, and I'm here with Case. Hello, Case.
Hey, Jeff. Good to be with you, man.
Yeah, thanks. We're coming at you from Isotherm HQ and Case's
bedroom number 4
bomb shelter in Rhode Island. And we are very, very happy with this installment of Eclectrocasts because we get to spend an hour talking to a woman who has supported myself and Case and so many of us out there who listen to Eclectrocasts and have been guest artists on Eclectrocasts. And we're here with Tracy Perry. Hi, Tracy. Great to have you here.
Great to be here. Hi to both of you. Very honored to be asked to do this.
Fantastic. So we're really, really happy to have you on here. And you know what, Tracy? You are our first guest who is not an artist who has released music, in a traditional way like all of us have. So that just adds to the excitement. Not that we don't like talking to artists, but we've had every show focused on an artist, and now we're focusing on a curator of artists.
But that's a bit of an art too, isn't it?
Absolutely.
In its own way.
Yeah. So Tracy, do you play any music? Do you sing? Like, we all sing in the shower, but or well, when nobody's listening. But do you play any instruments or?
I learned piano when I was younger. It was one of those things of my parents neither were musicians, and they decided I needed to do a sport and an instrument. And so piano ended up being it. And I played for many, many years and never got past, just learning. Never made it into anything again. Yeah, other than the shower, I don't do the singing either.
Good.
Tracy, how did you become first interested in music, aside from taking piano lessons? And was there a radio on in your house a lot? Was it a large part of your growing up at home? Yeah,
it was. Yes and no, I guess is the best way to say it. My parents played the radio a lot, and when you're talking in the 80s, there was a lot more going on the radio than I think today. They didn't. It hadn't gotten to the point where they played the heck out of something. So, my parents would have the country station on and it would just play. We did have a stereo, and my parents had a small amount of records and as they came out, tapes. But a lot of it was over time. I think by the time they got me into piano, I was, late elementary school, then going into junior high. And I think the difference is when you're playing an instrument, it opens you up into music that you probably aren't listening to at home. We didn't listen to a ton of classical. I got into playing blues and ragtime on the piano. So that wasn't something, I heard at home. My dad always said, Fantasia or anything classical was on, he was out like a light. So and unless you wanted to sleep, that was the only. And so I think, anytime you pick up an instrument, it not only teaches anybody how to play, but it teaches you how to listen. Yeah. And that ends up being a lot more important because you have to listen to the cues. You have to listen to when you're playing with other people, when you're supposed to come in, when you're supposed to be quiet, how loud and soft you need to be, blending in. If you're doing a recital or anything, making sure you're heard or that, what you're trying to get across comes across. Because I think a lot of times and probably with any instrument, but I noticed this a lot with piano, you could just play so softly that nobody hears you. Or you play so loud, you just sound like you're blamming on the keys, and it's not coming across what you're trying to do. And I think being in that environment, then it opens up a lot of doors. Like, oh, well, what other music am I not listening to that isn't, I got into more, it was like, it wasn't my friend's music, it wasn't my parents' music. What else was out there? And that's where really, I kind of segued off, because a lot of the friends I had, if they were playing an instrument, it got put down when they got home, and that was it. They were listening to what they were playing, which, that a lot of times I think when it's with kids, that happens. You're learning to play classical, and you go home like, I'm not listening to that. And mine ended up being the opposite. I ended up listening and continue a lot more with classical music than probably with anything else. For me, it's always on. It's on when I get in the car. It's on when I get home. A lot of times it's on in workplaces. I think the largest difference between listening to classical and just having the radio on is, one, there's more variety, believe it or not. A lot of times they don't replay the same thing. You're only going to hear Beethoven's Ninth every so often. Where, if you listen to the regular radio, they're going to play X, whatever hit is, every hour. And so you burned out as much, because they have segments like in the middle of the day, they're playing movie stuff, and it's all about the soundtracks to movies, and it's never the same. They're going to go back over the same thing the next day or the next month, because there's so much content. I think what people don't understand is there is so much content to explore that you could play something different all day, every day for probably 100 years or more and never play the same thing twice.
That's true. That's true. Definitely. I think I was first exposed to classical music through television cartoons. I still remember seeing a scene, it must have been in Bugs Bunny or something like that, where they're playing Rossini, they're playing part of the Barber of Seville or something like that. And, that comes across that way. Also, NPR was a great exposure for me to classical music, before I really even knew it was going on. So, and I think we all just happen upon it that way.
I think there's a large difference with that now. You don't see it in commercials and things like you used to. There was a segment of time, that's how they sold, luxury cars. It was classical music. It made it seem elegant. And now it's they don't do that as much anymore. It's went from you're refined by listening to it to that's hoity-toity. And so, okay, don't play that because you want, I think more and more things are becoming commercial, and an idea of you have to sell it. And they don't want it to be, I just want to sell to this part of the population. They want anybody to come in to buy. So I think there's been this turn back away from classical, just because for a while it became this refined, you're better, you're in the upper tiers if you went to the ballet or the opera or listen to this stuff. And so now they're like, we're like everyone else. We're going to play whatever's the latest thing. And it's all a ploy. It really is all a ploy. And it's unfortunate because I think, as Jeff was saying, we grew up with classical being in areas that you don't see it anymore. It's not in cartoons. It's not in commercials. It's, you almost have to search for it, which is very bad. I think a lot of people don't know it even exists. Just to turn the radio on.
I think classical music is probably best experienced when you hear it live. It's notoriously difficult to record the impression you get live, from an orchestra. It's nearly impossible. Even the best records like Deutsche Grammophon or those kinds of companies that have put a lot of effort, it still doesn't closely approach the live experience. And that has become incredibly expensive to have live orchestras play. And that's...
It is, unless you're around a college. Like about an hour from here is University of Iowa. So when I was an undergrad, I went to the symphony every Wednesday night. It was great. And of course I could drive up there on Wednesdays, once a month and still listen. But I think when you're in a college environment, there's so much more available, especially when they have a really nice music college that you can go and show up. I spent lots of weekends at the music college, just listening to recitals, because you could go to pretty much anything. And of course they had a section of things that were paid, but when you're a student, it's dirt cheap. And it's one of those things like locally, across the river, there's Augustana, and they have their own classical station that comes out of the college. So, and for me, it's on both sides, which is good, because if one's yammering too much, you can turn on the other one. But
so I think modern music sounds better recorded than live very often. And it sounds good in all kinds of spaces. You don't need a large hall. It sounds good in your car. It sounds good in your house. And so I think, the recording of the electronic music, you don't need to hear that live, because it's not an improvement over the recorded work.
Well, yeah, true, but it's also a social thing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Very, very infrequently do people do electronic music live that isn't danceable. Right. It has a different purpose. They do? So Tracy, what do you remember from growing up? Were there any artists or music that made an impression on you from your parents' collection, or that you did hear that kind of maybe kind of pushed you further into creating that musical person that you are now, that kind of, that kept you on the path towards exploration?
There was a few, and funny because that is something I was noting. And a lot of times I think what happens is we tend to glom on to a few things that we recognize from them. Like I said, I heard a lot of country growing up. So, it was Travis Tritt and, Dolly Parton and all of that. And before all the Carrie Underwoods and everything came along. So we're talking probably between old country and what's now country. And, there was some pop and things like, Elton John, Billy Joel. Billy Joel's The Stranger definitely was one of the albums that, as I became older, stayed with me. And I think, but there was other things, and part of them were just because they were oddball things that my dad would do. He would collect Ray Stevens music, and if you don't know who that is, and comedy, and that was dinner time, and there's nothing like trying to eat and laugh. Laugh so silly, but it was that, or Snoopy and the Red Baron was at Christmas. You had those sorts of things punctuating it, and it was to the point like when I would go to school, like I'd be laughing about the pirate song, and nobody knew what I was talking about, and you'd play it, and it wasn't the same. If you didn't have an environment that was open enough to play some of that stuff, people would just give you the oddball eye. What are you listening to? Oh, come and listen to X that's popular now. And I think part of that got me out of X that's popular now. You'd listen because your friends were listening, but the things I grabbed as I went to college or moved on and stuff, and I would call and go, oh, what was that album that had this on it? What was that album that had that on it? And a lot of it was, the Ray Stevens, my parents had the Stevie Nicks, Lindsey Buckingham album, Fleetwood Mac, Elton John. There was definitely a bunch of country thrown in there. And then, excuse me, over time, I think my dad and I ended up with a journey. I would open up to certain things. It was like, oh, there's Celtic music. And then we'd start finding things and swapping them. And that's been going on for decades now. I was like, oh, guess what I found? And, it goes from here's a tape to here's a CD to here's a hard drive to now it's like, what your Dropbox is full. You need to clean that out. So I can send
exactly.
And I think it's also because we live in a time period that music's become a lot more accessible for everyone. And you can experience things without, I remember growing up, you would pore over that, do I want this CD or that CD? Because you didn't have enough money to buy, like 5 or 10. You could buy 1 or 2.
Right. And
so you really had to decide, am I buying X? Am I buying Y? Do I want to wait a month because this is coming out? And I got less into popular music and more into researching weird indie labels because everybody already knew this stuff. Music. If I wanted to listen to, any of the stuff everybody else was listening to, I could A, turn on the radio or B, borrow it from a friend or they'd make you a mixtape. So why was I spending money on something that was already available?
So can we continue on with that really quickly, Tracy? Because we're kind of going chronologically here, just out of default. And you had said to me that as a teen, you spent a lot of time talking to or corresponding with independent or underground labels, asking them for their catalogs, etc. And we're kind of in pre-internet days now with this, I imagine. So could you kind of carry on talking about how did you do that? I mean, I know that the bootleg underground sort of fanatics trade tapes and want lists with each other with people all over the world. And they subscribe to fanzines and things like that. And even popular bands were discovered through underground tape trading, like Metallica broke through that way in the early 80s before major labels even knew who they were. How did you come across these? How did you know where to look for a lot of this music?
I was at the library a lot. It was, especially early teens, you couldn't research what you might want to do online because there was no online. So it was go to the library and get books on whatever occupation you thought you wanted to be doing. And I always ended up in the magazine aisle. And, it was grabbing some of that stuff. And I had a chance like, okay, look and see what the normal stuff's doing. And I was always in the back. And I don't know if this is still true, but in the back of the sections, it used to be like the classifieds. And you could find pen pals and you could, there was different companies that would be, oh, you want to learn about this? Send us a self-addressed stamped envelope. And I used to remember hearing that. I think a lot of people from back then heard it a lot. The self-addressed stamped envelope was going all over the place for stuff for a long time. And I would start doing that. And I got catalogs from places like Purple Turtle, 1-800-PRIME CD, Poe Music. Those are a couple I actually still have the CDs from and dug out. And you got these nice, it was sort of like when you used to go to the record store and there'd be the magazine up at the register and you'd open it and it'd have reviews and they were very short. And it was like enough so you'd pour over it for like a long time going, okay, which one of these things sounds like it fits what I want to listen to? Because that was before you could try it out.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't even the days where you could go to Borders or Barnes and Noble and, scan it and listen to some clips. You were like going in, it was in the dark. And so I would get these black and white catalogs in, and they might or may not have even a picture of the cover art. And it would just tell you a little bit about it. And that's also how I got into telling people about sound bites instead of reviews, because they were literally like a few sentences, maybe a paragraph. And it was enough to, I remember circling things and there was stuff I would save money up for. And be like, oh, I can't afford that one yet, but I'll get this one. Or there's 5 of these in this catalog I want, but I can only get, one. Which one am I getting? And it really got to people that could write really well. So you could understand that's the one I was going to get because their words made you buy. Nothing like today, because I think today you can just go listen for yourself. Oh yeah, I like that, or yeah.
But in the MTV age, music was also sold with images, right? Like people would buy the music because of the good video, right?
Right. And I think what happened there is we went through a time period that X sounded really good because we heard, we saw the video for one song. We were like, oh, we're going to go buy that. And the rest of the album, you're like, oh God, that was a song that was good. And I have a lot of those one song albums, it was like, oh, that was a really good song. I don't know what happened on the rest of the album, but that was a really good song. And there was almost, I think today is almost the same thing. I know people think back then there was more weeding out of bad music, but I don't think there was any more weeding out than we have. They would sell their album to a company based on one or two tracks. They can be okay, and then they'd make the rest in the same thing. You're selling lots and lots of albums based on a single or two singles. But that also, I think, brought back the rise of singles. They did for a while when vinyl came out, the single shot vinyl up back in the day. And then there was the cassette singles, and you had one, maybe a B-side, maybe just one song. And that, I think, helped a lot because people to the point where they weren't going to buy the whole album they hadn't heard, but they'll buy that single, so they're still making money.
In the disco era, you got those 12-inch extended singles, with the higher quality because it was on a 12-inch disc rather than an 8-inch disc, or...
And the grooves, the cuts, the grooves themselves were spaced out differently. So so all the frequencies were not compressed
You
together.
got much more dynamics, particularly in the low.
Right.
Yes, there was a lot of magazines at the time that you could write in, and they would take out a small ad, and you could write in and get your little catalog and stuff. And of course, we all get the ones where we're like, okay, what did I get myself into with this? And then there's others you're like, oh, jackpot. And you'd find most of these have all gone far away. They've been gone for decades. But there was around the time a lot of these went under is the time CD Baby started. And that's when they used to have the buy four, get one free. And that also was another way people got you into something, like they'd throw in an extra something or other, and it could be a sampler or just some album, and you'd get it in. You'd wonder, you were more excited about the extra whatever it is you were getting than the stuff you picked. And sometimes you were like, ooh, sampler, and I got a lot of samplers that way that, and I think to this day, that's still a really good way for labels.
Your show is kind of like a sampler show, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's when it was one of the ideas when I started putting it together. It was, how do you showcase a bunch of different types of artists into an album, but not make it sound like you're jumping around? You want to make it sound fluid so people can keep listening.
So how do you do that? How do you make those kinds of choices when you put your show together?
The first thing I do is usually pick way too many things. And it's I just keep putting stuff in the playlist. And then at some point I'm like, oh yeah, I guess, 3 hours is too much. And then I start kicking them into another playlist. And usually what happens is I will pick one song, and that's what everything's based on. Whatever the first track is will lead the way for everything else.
Oh, nice.
Because that doesn't per se set a theme or a tone, but it will set the mood in the beginning. And it's one of the reasons I got into doing intros and then got out of it, because I realized the way I listen to music is the music starts and I just listen all the way through. And you keep people's attention better if it's not broken up. And so, I'd start with a song like the last one I had, yours and Lucia's song first. And for me, what I'll do is I'll listen to the beginning and I listen to the end. And within the last, could be between 15 and 20 seconds, I sync that in and look for a song that can come right after that without it sounding there's.
Yeah, so you don't want to make it too abrupt of a change.
Right. You wouldn't go from something that's, let's say, shoegaze and very low key to grunge metal.
Uh-huh.
It's too abrupt a change, and that's jarring for people. And so I'll also use things like instrumental tracks to separate sections. So, I have vocal track, and then I'll throw something in that the beginning will segue into something instrumental, but by the time it ends, it could lead into, let's say, a rock track or something else. So you can change the mood with that. And in one of the ideas, though, is to get people to listen to stuff they normally don't.
So the instrumental pieces, you, what I understand from you, you often try to think of them as ways to make a transition. Now, one of the things that struck me, you send us 4 tracks of 4 different artists. But when I listen to your show, you do seem to have an attraction to more down-tempo stuff rather than up-tempo stuff, like music that is more reflective, or that maybe leads to reflection. Can you talk a little bit about where your affinity comes from for the music that you choose?
I think a lot of it is because I listen to music that speaks to me. And I think that is more thoughtful overall. I don't think there's anything wrong with, a bunch of dance tracks or anything like that. It's just not normally what I would listen to.
Well, sometimes you're in the mood for that. That's great. Yeah.
I think it's the same thing. Like sometimes you're in the mood for growly metal, but not all the time. And well, some people are all the time, I'm sure. I think, the contemplation is really where I'm usually at. I'm listening. And I think when you're listening to something and this always gets me with, there's an awful lot of music that it's to make you move around or do something. It's to make you react, not listen. You're busy jigging around or dancing around. You're not paying attention to what they're saying or what the music's telling you. And that's, I think, what's happened the mainstream is that's how you get weird songs in the top 20 that have weird themes. And you'll look at somebody and be like, you know what that song's about, don't you? And they don't. They have absolutely no idea that they just are singing loud to a song about, divorce or cheating or, shooting everybody. And they're not listening. And then when you tell them and then they listen, they're like, oh my God, I'm never listening to that again. Or maybe they like it more. But I think what my show is to show people or to make people hear there's a lot of music out there that it's like books. You're reading something to experience, to learn, to grow. You're not just background music. I can put on Beyonce or something and just jig around, but I'm not going to learn it. There's I think for me, the large difference, if I put something on and it's Catherine Meeson's latest that, she's talking about being part of the earth. It's very high, it's very soaring, it's very in depth. It's, a cross between, say, like operatic and theatrical. It's, if you're really paying attention, it's just heartbreakingly beautiful. And you can't get that, I don't think, from some of the higher forms, like uppity music. It doesn't come across as well. But having said that, what happens is I will find something that's more uppity and I shove it in there in the middle. And I think when you bookend songs together, it becomes part of it instead of feeling like if it's separate, it sounds like X. If you stick it in with the other tracks, it blends in and all of a sudden it becomes something totally different. And I've had people write me and will tell me, where do you put my song? I never would have thought it would have sounded like that. Like it's just really a different perspective on how their song ended up sounding because I stuck it somewhere that didn't correspond with listening to it by itself, which is on purpose. Because I think one of the things is it's that old saying, like nothing good happens in the comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to put the music somewhere you wouldn't expect it to be, and still blends in. And you listen to it, and it's something completely different. Even if you've heard the song like 50 times,
right?
You stick it something else, and it becomes something totally different because of whatever it's being played with.
And this is like for us, who put out albums or EPs. This is something that all of us struggle with. Is to create a flow in the album, from the first song to the last song. It's not that easy to do, and you're describing it in some very interesting detail that put some thoughts in my mind of composing maybe the songs with an order in mind and with the transition in mind. So I thank you for that. It's something that I always think about afterward, never ahead of time. How about you, Jeff? Do you have the same experience?
I obsess over it. I'm very much album oriented.
Yeah.
Just because the music that I really, really, really enjoy listening to starts one way and changes a little bit over time, and there are peaks and valleys, and there's a time to decompress, and there's a time to experience elation, and I don't know whether I achieve it or not, but a lot of thought into the track order and the transitions in my isotherm work really has that in mind. Like on Silence the Second Voice, I had those short pieces, the reflection pieces that were kind of put in different parts of the album through start to finish. So I do think of that. And so, Tracy kind of formulates her Expansion of Presence shows with that and very many other things in mind, as obviously based on what you're saying. So
it's not just a hustle, a playlist made by hustling some songs together. You really put a tremendous amount of thought in it.
And that kind of brings me to another quick question, Tracy. And you see this a little bit with greatest hits compilations, which even though it's a nice way to get the more popular songs in one spot for an artist, it's not really true unless it's done in a particular way. It's not really true to the journey that the artist maybe had in mind when those songs had been released over the past 10 or 15 years, that were pulled from for that compilation. What do you think, Tracy, about the difference between a jukebox iPad kind of or iPod kind of culture and maybe something that involves a little bit more thought, like you've been saying, a little bit more listening to go on that journey, rather than just being able to kind of press play and then skip, and then 30 seconds in, press skip, 30 seconds in, press skip. Does that come into your mind at all when you choose your tracks?
It does, because I think you spend more time. It's a lot more time to constantly be looking for the next song. And I think, when jukeboxes came around, the idea is like you'd go up and you'd play whatever your song was, and somebody else would go up and play whatever their song was. And it made sense for that environment. But I think when you're at home listening, it's jarring to constantly be changing the track. You don't really get anything done because you're constantly going, what am I going to play next? And it's not in order unless you build your own playlist. It's that old joke about, I have all these songs on my, in my iPod that I love. How come it's not playing anything I like?
Yeah, right. Isn't that interesting?
You set it on shuffle and you're like, ugh. Or you set it on shuffle and it's like hit after hit. And I think sometimes when I'm listening, if I have time and people send me a lot of links, it is like that. I'm playing one thing out, and it's changing tracks a lot. But it's because, I'm trying to keep up with maybe 10 people have, uploaded something on SoundCloud. And I think it's a different kind of listening. If I'm, really wanting to get into someone's album, I'm not going to jump around like that because A, it doesn't make any sense. And then you don't get a really good feeling of it because within that time span, you're not paying attention. And I think that happens a lot. We do have more culture where people are multitasking way too much. And usually you can do one or two things. Like maybe you can have music on and you're filing something. You're doing, I want music on when I am doing X. And one's not, I would say, like X mindless task, and then I can be paying attention. Or that's where background music comes in a lot. You know, when you go into restaurants and you go into stores and you hear what's playing over the loudspeakers, and it isn't any more music, it's actual playlists, but they're formulated for something. You know, if you go into a restaurant, they're playing music to get you to eat more or stay longer. And I think that, you know, isn't the intention when you guys are putting music out, it isn't, well, if I play this, they'll eat more tacos, or, you know, if I play this, I'll spend more time in Walgreens.
But that would be a fun challenge, you know, like if we, you know, we've all participated in these challenge groups, and it would be kind of a fun challenge to make a piece that would make people eat more, you know. I don't know. I have to think about this.
I think that is where you hear a lot more dance type tracks or up type tracks is when you go to restaurants and stuff. It's not as enjoyable if you're listening to very low key, let's say drone music, when you go out to eat. You know, nobody's doing that. And
well, you know, I'm a vegetarian, and I go to a lot of alternative places to eat, and they do play much more indie music. It is not really music to eat by or talk by. It's really overwhelming. But the food is so good that it makes me eat faster.
so you can create a playlist and just get takeaway and eat it in your car.
Right.
Yeah, basically. This is my taco playlist.
Yeah. Hey, Tracy, you sent us 4 tracks to listen to, and can you talk a little bit? Can you pick one and talk a little bit about why you selected the track for all of us in Eclectrocasts land to listen to?
Because we were talking about drone, I'll start with How to Disappear Completely, which is HTDC if you're looking for them. They're a collective from Poland that I found a few years ago, and they're lo-fi drone. It's very minimal.
I love this track. I loved it. I thought that was a great track.
Aislinn from their new album, Meer de Ribs. And every time they put something out, you would think there's only so much you can do with drone music, but they've put about 27 albums of it out. And I would say like not one of them are alike at all. And with this latest one, it's just it's one of those things like if you have your headphones on and you close your eyes and you're listening, you can almost see the scenery that the music is giving you while you're listening. It's its own visual, and you wouldn't think that with drone music. You would think it's just this steady sound, but they've made it where there's enough modulation in there to tell a story if you're really paying attention.
Right. They use interesting pads, choice synth pads, and then also vocal elements. They may not be necessarily voices, but vocal sounds.
Well, there's a lot of guitar on there too. That's stretched out or treated somehow.
Yeah, I really liked it, and it's an example of what I think is your affinity to thoughtful music. And it almost by necessity becomes a lower tempo to create space for experience, right? So why don't you take us to that track? Why don't you announce the track for us?
This is Aislinn from Meer de Ribs by How to Disappear Completely.
Yeah, so for everybody who's listening, we will put the information of each of the tracks on the Eclectrocast website. So you should be able to find the links to the artists that we're playing today. So can you talk about another one, or maybe we'll do this a little later?
I'm wondering if we could start to talk about expansion of presence and the birth of that. And Jill Beaulieu has a question. You know Jill from Meter Bridge, and she wanted to know, why did you choose expansion of presence as a name?
When I was first asked to do a show, it was a friend of a friend that asked me. And it was sort of like, oh, do you just want to put a show together and pop it out? And I was like, okay. And then when I was asked to do another one, I thought, oh, I need to call this thing something. And, you look at what everybody calls their shows. And one of the things I noticed is shows are like brands. And you really have to be careful what you're calling, what your brand is going to be, what you're trying to convey to people. And I think choosing names can be extremely difficult, because there's so many ways to go with it. Are you funny about it? It's some inside joke that you're using. Is it just an offshoot of a name? And the more I thought about it, what I wanted to get across with expansion of presence is to get people to literally expand their musical listening, to take what you already know and realize that there's all this other content out there that will take you on the same journey, but maybe isn't what you thought it was. It's getting people to change their mind about stuff. And I think when, if you normally do not listen to drone music, you have a idea in your head of what it is. And then when you segue from something somebody does know, let's say it's a rock track, and it goes right into something that ends up being drone, there's less likelihood they're going to skip it because they're already in it. By that point, they figured out, oh, this is something else. And then it's sort of like the old, if you get people to laugh, they're more open to paying attention to a different opinion. And to me, music's the same thing. If you get their mind open in the beginning, they're more likely to keep listening as long as you don't stop them from listening. So you can segue into something like that, and they come out of it and go, oh, well, that's not what I thought drone music was, or that's not what I thought shoegaze was, or I had no idea what post-rock was. And it, there might be names they don't recognize and others they do. And, you go into it going, hey, my track's being played, and you listen to it up, people aren't skipping around. They're, oh, I'm going to listen. Oh, there's my track. Oh, wait a minute. It's right next to X. Well, I really like X. And then I see a lot of that online now that, somebody will write somebody else, hey, I was listening to X show and I heard your track, and, then they start talking, and that's exactly what I was going for in the beginning. It was very literal. Your expansion of presence is literal in every single way. It's not just expanding your musical presence. The more you open up to things, the more other parts of your life changes. So your presence overall expands because you've enveloped something else. And by doing so, it usually causes you to envelope more than just new music. It's more connections and stuff as well. It's more ideas. It's, if you listen to a song that's thought-provoking, then it may get you to really think about your stance on something, or change your mind about something, or learn something you never would have gotten into.
Yeah, you had a little hiatus from Twitter, and then you came back on fire. Just a couple of months ago, I think, like maybe half a year ago. And you've been putting out some things about how to be effective on Twitter. So how to, and it sounds like you've been trying to articulate how to create your presence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I attend a few tweet chats a week, or I at least try to get them in there. And there's a couple music ones. One's Music Hour UK. There's GG Chat. That's Go Girls Music, which Jill's been to a couple.
Yeah, I saw a few from that, yeah.
There's, and that's on Thursday. And then Thursdays is also Twitter Smarter. And that, I got into it before and I just didn't talk a lot about it. And then when you're on there for a while, you realize you have something to say and you start talking to these people in the chats. And there's more than one way to do any of it. I mean, there always is. And I try to put my voice in now because most of the time what they're talking about is businesses. And believe it or not, it's like being a musician is a small business.
Right.
You're selling a commodity to people. You're trying to get them to buy an item, which is whatever album or single or compilation you're putting out.
Right.
And same with me. It's like getting people to listen to the show. And the more you understand what works and what doesn't, especially on social media, you can incorporate things to make it work for you. And sometimes, even though it's repetitive, I'll post things that other people in the chat are posting just because I know it will reach some of you guys, and then you'll see it and go, oh, maybe I should add pictures. Maybe I should add these hashtags. Maybe I should use Twitter lists. And because a lot of people, do not have time, to take out an hour to go to stuff. We all have jobs and other things going on. And I think if somebody in the community is doing it, then the whole community benefits.
Oh, yeah.
And if I can take the time out on behalf, of the community and then pass along what I'm learning, the more people it benefits, the better to me, even if it's one or two people.
Right.
And you did it on Facebook too. Maybe before
Correct.
you started doing it on Twitter.
Right.
Yeah. I think the nice thing about doing it on Facebook is you can put a much longer posting than Twitter. You have to be very succinct.
Right.
And on Facebook, I know a lot of people choose one or the other. Basically, when I started, I chose Twitter. And usually whatever you start with is what you're most comfortable with. That's your comfort zone. And for those of us that have crossed over and we're on both, I see a lot of people floundering. It's like, well, I know Facebook really well, but that Twitter thing I don't get, or the vice versa. It's like, okay, I don't get the Facebook thing, but I get Twitter. And the posts are really on both. And it was helping people on Facebook. And I'm like, well, I know people on Twitter that aren't seeing these. How do I be more succinct in getting this information out? Because I think it's the same thing. Anything that helps people get out the information, the content you're looking to get out, and not either driving people away because you became the used car salesman and you're like, come by, or, on the other hand, not doing, there's some people I see like they just repost everything. And that's not great content curation. If I'm looking at somebody's feed and all it is reposts, well, why am I following them? They're not talking to anybody.
You're missing a lot of their stuff. Yeah. And
I think you don't pay attention as much. It's gets into very little things. Excuse me, like quoting a tweet instead of just retweeting. Add some content onto it to get people's attention. If one of you guys releases an album, then I might put hey, check this out. So-and-so did this. Something simple.
Yeah, we've been working with the Eclectrocasts accounts and then our own accounts, and we sort of create, our own little conversations that way, so that when people look at a tweet, it's not just one line. There is a little bit of a story going on. We got a question from another listener, and we all know very well, Lucia Phoenix. And Lucia is going to have a new album coming out with Rob. Together they do Unknown Land on May 12th. A little plug here. And I had the pleasure of doing a single with her recently, a one-off single that you were so kind to play. Thank you very much. But Lucia has a question that sort of harks back a little bit to what we started to talk about earlier. And, she also has a statement. She says, I consider Tracy, a great collector, supporter, and curator of music, exclamation point, exclamation point. I imagine her hard drive as the great Alexandria Library of Modern Music. So her question is, how many albums and EPs do you have in your digital collection, and how many different music styles?
Oh, let me turn on my screen and I'm going to look. I actually have absolutely no idea. It keeps growing. At this period in time, I have 6,504 albums right now that I'm looking at. Now, I probably have I have hard drives that I use for music. One to back everything up because, I don't want to lose anything. I have two. And then one and then an extra that's a backup because you don't want something to go horribly wrong.
Digital files don't really exist unless they're in like 2 or 3 places.
No, at this point I am at 740 gig.
Oh, well,
of
that's a
music
lot.
on one Yeah. So that's just the content I work with the most. I have another one that's probably about the same size content, and I have 13 cases, those ones that you can get and put like 250 CDs in. I have about 13 of those, and some odd vinyl, of course, and tapes. It probably is enough where I could never play the same thing for the next 20 years. And it's an insane amount, and I add to it probably daily.
I like how the iTunes library tells you how much time of files that you have.
Right. How much of your life you will spend if
Right. You could just hit a shuffle and it would take, a year and a half to go through your your library.
How much time you have on your drive,
Since we were speaking about Unknown Land,
probably makes a good segue to play Unknown Land's track that I sent you. 33 Degrees Alternate Realities album.
Yep.
So what is your attraction to their music?
I first heard Rob first when Bear Island.
Yeah, me too.
And got to know him on both Twitter and Facebook when I moved over, and Lucia later with her album. And then when they put out 33 Degrees, it was one of those where I was talking to her yesterday, and I said it reminds me of the Eurythmics a lot, where there's this duo, and they're both very strong on both sides. They can both be separated, and solo work is outstanding, and you put them together, and it's just somehow even better. One of those ones that I don't know what's possible, but you stick them together, and it's just even better than they are separated. And it's very contemplative music, even though it's very the track I picked is very, I would say, more up tempo and upbeat.
It's rhythmic.
Lucia's vocals are so powerful, and I mean it's like the quintessential strong woman. You want to listen to her. She's going to tell you something. You're going to pay attention. And I think that draws people in. And I don't think it's just me. I remember being sent 33 Degrees Alternate Realities, and the first song I heard was Pulse, and I was just blown away. And I just listened to that song like 5 times and then remembered I needed to listen to the rest of it. And, I couldn't pull myself away from that track. And this was... I had to get up the next morning, and I remember I was going to listen to this before I went to sleep, and I'll just listen to a couple tracks, right? And I was up for like an hour. I couldn't stop listening because it was so good. And I kept telling myself, just go to bed, listen in the morning. No, just listen to one more. And then I would go back to Pulse every couple of tracks and be like, I'm going to listen to this one more time. And that was, it was one of those things where you hear it, and they're a prime example that I use for people when they're talking about how to do remixes and things correctly, or even the one-offs correctly. I'll send them Pulse, and I'll say, listen to this. And then I'll send them the Sweetest Condition version, remix. and I'll be like, now listen to this. And if that doesn't blow you away, I don't know what will. But if you listen to one, you listen to another, it's almost two completely different tracks.
Yeah.
And you could listen to the one and never in a million years expect how they remixed it to come out.
The thing that I like about the remix is that it's a little bit more clear in the remix how what Lucia's strengths are in her singing. And I know because she sent me a dry track. So, when you get a dry track, you get to listen much closer to how a person sings. And there's three elements that make her singing very, very strong. It's how she goes into a phrase. The second thing is how she comes out of a phrase. And I think everybody who should really listen how she goes in a phrase and how she comes out of a phrase. And she does very interesting things with her voice. And then, which was something that I didn't catch earlier, she has a wonderful, beautiful vibrato in her voice.
Yes.
And I think that's very special because, some singers have vibrato and it's just outright annoying, but it works really, really well in her voice. And I think if you listen for those three elements, you get much more out of listening to these tracks. So I
think.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tracy.
I think not only that, but taking into account you have one duo remixing another duo. I mean, the Sweetest Condition is, dark synth pop. They have very strong, almost industrial style synth music, and they bring that into the track, and you can almost take it where it's not a duo, and you would think it's the quad of them doing that track together, because for a while I remember listening to it a couple times and thinking, do I hear Leslie's voice in there as well? Is there something else going on? Because I thought it was redone so well that I could not only pick out the original, but I could hear the Sweetest Condition in it. Like it really pulled who they are into the track and enhanced it. And I don't think you hear that a lot with remixes. They're either choppy, and not that they're done badly, but they're, either chopped up in certain ways. They don't take it and almost elevate it into something else. And it's, Unknown Lane calls themselves, sci-fi artistic. And the other, says, it's dark synth pop and, industrial type. And it was like, okay, what happens in the apocalyptic future is this song. Because that's what you get when you put, sci-fi, dark, industrial together is that. And it's not, if you pick it apart by verbiage, you would never imagine what you actually hear, which I think is what makes this track and the whole remix album's excellent. But I think why a lot of people go back to this track in particular is because it's so amazing on so many levels, and that you can hear both artists during it. You hear Rob's wonderful music in the back. You hear Lucia, of course, very powerful and strong. You hear the Sweetest Condition bring their piece of it in, and it just blends so beautifully. Can
you announce the track for us so we can go take a listen?
Sure, this is Pulse, and it's the Sweetest Condition remix off the 33 Degrees Alternate Realities album by Unknown Lane.
Oh, this sound will be my legacy. I did all with love, and when this ball sends, my passion still remains. All with love, and when this ball sends, my passion still remains. be my witness and my only hope. And when this pulse ends, my passion still remains. And my voice will save my soul.
Tracy, you have two specialty shows which are kind of, I don't know if I can call them offshoots. They're kind of features, maybe specials as part of Expansion of Presence. You have the Curiosities, Macrocosm, and Android Frog sessions. How did you come to develop those two specialties?
Well, Curiosities Macrocosm was actually, I think, in my second year of doing the show, 2015. Mm-hmm. And
Kim hosted one of those. Remember that case? Do you remember? Yeah.
And really what happened was I wanted to bring in what artists and musicians I knew were listening to in their own realms. Not like their top 40, what everybody else knew, but literally like when you go home, what do who are your friends? Who are you listening to? And not only to open me up to new things, which it really did, because, people were pulling stuff out. I'm like, wow, there's some really cool things going on that I didn't know about, but it brings more audience in as well, because it showcases the people that are curating it in a different fashion. It's not pushing their own music per se, although pretty much I tell them at least put one or two of your own tracks in, or collaborations or anything like that. But like Michael Muser did the start of the first series and the start of this series. And this time he did the Donuts collaborations, and he was that was the whole show, was that project. And others use it as they're really good. Cami, the Magical, just did one for me, and it was a lot of local artists, and she pulled stuff out from her past and was sending it. I was like, here's some early stuff. And I think it gives people the opportunity to get out of their usual hat and put on a different one and have fun with it. They don't feel under the spotlight or anything. I'm not going to ask them why they picked any of it. It's like, pick what you want, pick things nobody knows about, pull stuff out of wherever you want to, and a lot of them will just send me the tracks and then I put them into whatever order I think they should go. And others will say, this is the exact order I want it in. And I think I don't want to say it gave me a break, but it almost gave me my own expansion. I can put this on and here's what somebody else's curation is going to be. I know Microchip Junkie did one, and Jill's done one, and you know, I get things back there like, that was a lot of fun. Okay, I wouldn't want to do that all the time, but it was, there's other people that have done it who have gone on to done shows themselves because it was like an opportunity. And to me, it's giving people an outreach, like, do you want this opportunity to do this because maybe they'll like it, and or maybe I'm just picking their brain. You know, if you know, when I look at it selfishly, it's like, I just want to pick and see what they know that I don't know. And it's amazing who will, you know, show up. There's people that I've met through someone else doing a curated show, and they're like, oh, I was on so-and-so's curated. Can you play my stuff on the regular show? And usually, oh God, yeah. You know, I didn't know you before this. And there's so many, it's a community thing. It's opening that part of it up to give the community more, because it's a way for me to give back, you know, to all of you. You give me such great listening pleasure. You know, how can I then open that up, give even more people, you know, that same thing. With Adroit Frog Sessions, I'd been thinking about it probably a year and a half before I actually did it. And while I was offline for a while, this was a lot of the analytical stuff going on. Do I want to split the show? Do I want to do this over here? How do I want to do that? And I finally decided to do that. And I finally decided on the name way in the beginning. And I was teasing it to people like, I think I'll do something called this. And my thought at the time was this steampunk sort of industrial type thing going on. But what it ended up turning into was instrumental. And instead of using, I try to split the regular show between, you know, instrumental tracks and vocal tracks. But I know a lot of people there's a lot of people out there who do not listen to vocal tracks. And I thought, well, there's so much good music out there. Again, there's a huge range and plethora. Let's just do a show based on that. And I thought, well, I can do a couple of these and see how well this goes over. And if it doesn't really, you know, I've plunked out things that are one-offs and just to see if people want to hear this or not. And I got a lot of feedback, and it was like, oh, I really liked hearing no vocals. I really liked listening to just this. And so I started expanding that. And so it's the same as the regular show. It's just non-vocal. It's any genre. I usually sometimes play longer snippets of things than I would on regular, although I've played, you know, 20 minutes of Sync Anonymous on the regular show. But I'll play like 10 or 15-minute tracks on there. There's, you know, anything that would be on the regular show just without the vocals. And the funny thing is, there's people that will send me stuff, and they'll send me an instrumental track that's like a bonus, or I'll be like, oh, I'm going to drop that track when I do push the album out. And I'll be like, can I just steal that? Put it in the show. And, you know, Lemonade Kid did that recently. He was talking to me about some remixes and stuff. And one was instrumental. And I, of course, loved the instrumental one. And he was like, oh, I was going to drop that off the track list. And I'm like, well, can I play it?
Right.
You know, can you make it a bonus on something? Maybe?
And it's good because it's featured. It's a feature for you then that wouldn't be ordinarily part of something that Lemonade Kid would release. Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think not only that, but a lot of it is songs that normally wouldn't be in most shows. You know, they would normally maybe play some of that. And some of it is artists that I incorporate either way. They're in either show. And then there's others where I'm like, that'll really fit over into this other one. And, you know, adroit, it's a word, you know, it means being skillful. And I think a lot of my thought process into the show offshoot was showcasing that instrumental music takes a lot of skill, and that it's, you know, there's a lot more going on that might get hidden for some people when they're listening to tracks with vocals on it. Because you're paying more attention to the vocals. So if you strip that down, what is the music itself telling you? And part of that gets back into how much classical I listen to. You know, you're letting the music speak to you. And
Well, you're talking to two people who compose pretty much exclusively instrumental music, so we can identify with that.
Well, and then I recently had the experience of working with Lucia, and I can tell you that took me many months to learn how to mix, because I'd never mixed vocals before, and it's extremely difficult to do because you want a nice balance, but you don't want the voice to be drowning in the music. That would be just like not serve the purpose at all. So yeah, it's quite complicated to do.
Yeah, Jim Wild's track, and he also does stuff under Spectres and softwares. I think the bounty of the music that's out is under Spectres, but under his own name, he does more composition based, and he put out an album called Songs for the Brokenhearted from the Departed. And I remember him sending it to me with trepidation and, listen to this. I don't know if I'm going to put it out. And I remember listening in, and this track, How We Break Each Other, just caught me. And it was, again, one of those ones that I kept going back to and listening to and listening to and listening to. And I remember writing him back and being like, you're putting this out, aren't you? Because it was, I think, that one of the signs that is that humbleness a lot of you have, the unsurety. And the more unsurety I usually see come across when somebody sends me something, usually the better whatever music is. It really ends up corresponding.
High standards.
Like, oh, they're not sure about this. And I listen, I'm like, oh, this is going to be really good. And it's never disappointing that way. And he has done so many things under Spectres that I own the whole Aurora of his. And there's one I think it's called Singles, and they're very short. And I remember going through and I plunk them in all over the place in shows. There's a couple of them that do this, and they read like 1 minute or less, and I sneak them in all over the time. To shows, we go, oh, well, I can sneak that. Okay, I have like 2 minutes left. That's going there. And he's one of those ones that it's, to me, very contemplative. And the album itself is all contemplation. But the song spoke to me so much because I thought it stood out. It was like, even after I tried to listen to the entire thing, I just went back to that one. Not that the rest was bad, but I think on a lot of albums, what you'll find is something will grab you along the way, and you just keep going back to it. And for me, this one from his was, and he's one of those ones, though, that has done so many other things. Yeah, I have a hard time keeping up with a lot of the projects people do, especially when they're under like 20 names. And am I screwing up? Is this the wrong person for the wrong project? And I will literally be looking stuff up. And he's done compilation albums with other artists under the Fallen Low label. And he just released a split with Bride Wore Black, where Body Smasher, that's another alias of his. And they're very different. I mean, listening to Soft Altars isn't going to be the same as Spectres, and it's not going to be the same as the stuff under his own name. And I think some people do that really, really well, separating projects where it's a totally different presence of theirs. And this was one where, as much of his stuff that I own, I go back to a lot.
So this is the track's called How We Break Each Other, right?
By Jim Wild.
Yes. And he plays electronic keyboard, and it has some very interesting elements of distortion in it. And the distortion pans out, pans left or pans right. But it is not like, like Fender Rhodes kind of, it's not the natural distortion. It's really exaggerated and added in. And when I was listening to this track, that really grabbed me. It's distortion. And it is such a contemplative piece, and the distortion sort of shakes you out of that. Every time it comes in either your left ear or your right ear, you just have to pay attention. It wakes you up, or it snaps you out. And I thought
it's how he breaks
sorry?
you. It's how he breaks you.
Yeah. So let's listen to it. Why don't you announce it for us?
This is Jim Wilde's How We Break Each Other off his album Songs for the Brokenhearted from the Departed.
So we have another question from Jill Bolio. Do you want to go there, Jeff?
Yeah. Yep. Let me just pull it up right here. This kind of, I think you're a good person to answer this, Tracy, because I think we all have our own opinions, but I think you are, and have been, based on what you've said so far in our discussion, you have had your ear kind of tuned this way in throughout a lot of your life. Jill's interested in knowing, what are your hopes for the future of the music industry?
First off, I hope that streaming services just go away. And I get how a lot of people find enjoyment out of them. And there's a lot of people that can't, that are students and stuff and can't afford to buy things all the time. And I have nothing wrong with if people pay for pro accounts for Spotify or any of that, but I don't find it beneficial on the musician side. You guys aren't really benefiting at all from it. It's not like, let's say, Hulu or Netflix, where there's licensing deals worked out, that, that's why the content's there, is because people are getting paid appropriately. And I think there's too many of them. There's too many of them out there, but there isn't really a good revenue stream coming in, and it will break the system. I think there's a point, too many people are just going to be going, well, you're basically working for free. Nobody's buying anything. And that's not, we don't live in that ideal future where nobody has to work and robots do everything and we can just sit around doing art. And we're not there yet. And I don't think we'll get there if corporations are in charge of, funneling music in this sort of fashion. And I think it also keeps people in their own bubbles. One of the biggest problems with online, I think, is, if you're in a bubble, you're going to stay there, and something has to get into your bubble to get you out of it, and that's for politics or religion or for music or anything else. And I don't think services that, you can just sit and stream for free, it doesn't give you the idea you need to pay for people's work. And I don't think that there's a high percentage of people that go from streaming something to buying something. If I can stream it 50 times off my account plus everything else, why am I going to go plunk down $5, $10, $15 or whatever? And I think there is still a market for that, because, there's plenty of people that put out vinyl or Kickstarter or pledge campaigns, and they get fully funded. There's people that aren't on streaming services at all, and they, will put an album out and lots of people buy it. There's people that do Bandcamp or Patreon subscriptions, and there's a bunch of people on there, giving them money to make music. So I think it really gets to you all as artists deciding what makes the most sense. Because I think at this point, the consumer has been given the wrong idea. And the only way to get them out of the idea is if the supply goes away. It is a supply and demand. If, the demand is all for free, but you guys aren't supplying it anymore, well, that's not going to work. They'll have to change. And I think the more musicians hone their craft and become better at talking to people about it, because I think PR and marketing is huge. We will hopefully start getting away from these YouTube sensations and people that are, they have 1 million views and, they have 2 songs out, but I think what happens is even in that respect, they try to, if you can't go from free to making money. If you came out on YouTube and you've been plunking everything out to all your viewers and it doesn't cost them anything, then asking them to pay for something's really difficult. I think people get used to free. And I think learning it's not free is hard, but we pay for things we really value. I go out and buy records, or, when you guys put something out, I try to go out and get that. And, granted, I could just stream it off Bandcamp, but usually it's in my wish list. And then when I get home, I'm like, oh, hey, there's my download for the weekend. And I think getting rid of some of the, I want to call them old school services, even iTunes, because I don't find it, you can't curate off iTunes. You're not going to find anything, in the sphere I'm looking at very well, exactly who you're looking for. And I think it's even the same with YouTube. I have no idea. You plunk around and you get recommended all the stuff everybody else is listening to. How do I find the stuff everybody's not listening to is my question. Yeah, I want to get out of that sphere. And, towards our question, I think there's always a breaking point. And I think the movie industry had it, where Sundance and stuff was coming to a head, and people, don't go to the movies as much. You have to end up having a format that benefits the content. It pays you guys for what you're doing, whether that's via licensing deals or anything. Plus, it gives people what they're looking for, whether they want to own it or not. Maybe I don't want to own all of The Walking Dead, but I want to watch it. So therefore, I'm either paying Amazon for the series, or I'm, waiting till it comes out on Netflix, which Netflix is then paying for.
So Tracy, what do you think of physical media? There's a good number of our Twitter friends that have brought out limited edition physical media. So people have put out music on floppy disks, on cassettes, CDs, vinyl, packaging things in interesting ways. I have a CD from Martin, a Trium Circularum, where in the packaging there is actually a knob that he used to manipulate his tools. What do you think of that? So this idea of limited physical editions that are not really store things, but that artists put out.
Oh, I'm all for that, because I think it's just like doing campaigns for music. You have tiers. And I think then people can choose what tier they're at, whether they're somebody that would find benefit in owning something like, that Martin sent, or, there's people that send stickers and buttons, or you can buy T-shirts or tote bags. Or I think one of the things Wozniak did recently is they did their single, and it came out then on a CD. And if you bought the CD, it had extra tracks to it. So there was then, you're not going to get the extra tracks unless you bought the CD. And I think you have to offer somebody something that makes sense for them. Whether, and not, it's not going to make sense for everybody. And usually when people ask me, I tell them, have every tier, have the digital tier. Have a tier above that where it's like, if you do X, you get extra tracks. Have one that's, maybe they don't collect cassettes, but maybe they collect vinyl, do a limited run. Ask people is the biggest thing I would say, because there's no sense chasing something and then nobody wants to buy it. Ask the people around you that may be interested. Always start with them, put out a Twitter poll or something. Are you interested in X, Y, and Z? There's like Pink Dolphin. What they do is they do digital, but they do campaigns for higher tiered items. And so it's like if they want to release physically on CD or something, I know one that I backed, it was like you could still get it digital, but you could only get the bonus tracks if you did it through the campaign. And so, doing things like that, I think, makes people collectors and it gets them more involved, because I think the days of, people getting bootleg tracks and stuff like that, we're out of those days, but you can kind of bring it back by limited edition items. You know, if you only have 200 of something and there's a countdown and you see there's only 9 left and you really like to collect T-shirts or something, maybe that's on there. And I think a lot of people get into it with the campaigns more than anything, because you can do things specific to the campaign. Like, oh, well, I was on one and they reached enough money to change the color of vinyl. But for everybody that wasn't doing the campaign, they were just going to get black. You know, and I think it also makes it where it's an incentive for people to pitch in and maybe to pitch in at more tiers. I tell people never forget like the $1 tier, because somebody might just want to give you goodwill. And maybe they don't have a lot of money, but they can pitch in $1. And if $1 will give them a shout out on social media, you know, hey, it's a $1.
Yes.
Bucks that up.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you get 500 people with that $1, right, that makes a big impact. Yeah.
Yeah. And even if you get 20 of them, that's $20 you weren't going to have before.
Right.
And I think people make the mistake of starting things too expensive. You know, you think, I'll start at the $20 or the, you know, and up. And I think don't leave out the $1 or $5. And there's ones I see that are really simple, like $1 will give you a shout out, $5 will give you a single. You can do many things, like maybe you had an album you never put out, and you could do a tier that's like, if you give $5 more, I'm going to send you this album I've never released. And I've got a few of those, you know, that it's like, hey, and that's limited edition. Cause then if it's only in the campaign, or I remember when Kay's did the one, it was like, if you do this, you get these bonus tracks. And I told people, do that, you know, do that where you, or, you know, I think LCDN did one where it was like, if it was pay what you want, but if you paid X amount, you got something extra. And I think that gives people the incentive to pay for music, because it's not really costing anybody anything more to send a digital download of a few files for a couple dollars that you weren't going to get otherwise.
Just one other quick thing is, you know, there have been people who have, or many actually that I've seen, started to offer their music as a subscription on Bandcamp. What do you think of that? Because it's almost like a private streaming, right? If you think of it.
There's a few people that I've picked up that way. The cool thing about it is you can give people stuff that's just subscriber only. And like, you can say, well, nobody else is going to get this unless you subscribe. Keith Ritchie did this recently, and he'll remaster stuff and then upload it. And then you're like, hey, I have a better quality version, you know, than you just bought it. There's a few that have done it for a short amount, because you can cancel it on both sides. So there's people that have decided they'll do a subscription for like a year, get people on board, you know, release some stuff, and maybe they don't have a ton of content, and they're like, well, you know, I'll do this up to a year. It gets all this content out, but maybe they've moved on to label, or they've moved on to things, collaborations where they can't release it based on that because it's not beneficial to maybe their collaborator or whatever. And that's okay too. You know, there's some that Jander Platek does that. We Deserve This, and he has a subscription under both names. And there's some things that he'll release under both, but there's a lot of stuff that just gets released under one or the other, and they're two completely different projects. So, you know, it's one of those ones like I'm subscribed to both. So sometimes I'll get double emails like, I've done X, and then he releases it under both, and I'm like, I have double X, whatever it was. And there's stuff people will pull out, and they'll be like, this was my first demo out, and you guys are the only ones that'll hear it. And there's been artists that, like Laura Marie's one, that, you know, will pull does a, you know, song of the month type of thing, and it's only released to subscribers. And so you can do some really fun things with it. and not, I think, feel like if somebody's giving you their money that you're under this huge obligation to give, tons of albums or anything. You can, pull things out and remaster them. And
yeah, you just have to be creative. Yeah.
Yeah, you can be really creative with it and realize that you're gaining a certain level of fan that way as well. Because if people are subscribing and you're not, you can do messages, you can do video with it, you can give discounts and stuff. I know some that I've gotten a message and they'll say, I'm doing this other album. It's not going to be under the subscriber thing because it's under X label. But for everybody on my subscriber list, type in this code and you get like $2 off. And so, you can really benefit yourself and your subscribers that way. Because you're giving them content they're not going to get otherwise, and I think you can delve into somebody's catalog a lot more under a subscriber type thing. I like Bandcamp better than Patreon because to me, Patreon seems a little bit too much like you're paying for somebody's living. And I think Bandcamp is more, I'm paying to get the music.
Yeah, Patreon. I was always curious about the tax implications of Patreon.
Yeah. I can see it for certain things. Like I know Crash Course has one, and if you never watched Crash Course, a lot of schools use it, to teach kids, and it's a really, really great videos if you ever want to go back and not, I don't remember chemistry and,
right.
I don't remember English literature. Let's go through that, or astronomy. They have tons of them, and it's all educational. And it astounds me on some of them how much money some of these will get through services. Even Kickstarter and Pledge. You will be surprised. You go out there and sometimes they want like $4,000, and you look and it's like 120,000 that they've made. I saw one that they didn't want very much. It was like 20,000 or something. It was for these men's socks that don't fall off. Yeah. Okay. And they were the ones, they were like the no-show socks. And I was showing somebody else that because they already made like $130,000 and still had like time left. But, there's a lot of ways you can take people that are completely unknown content, do a cute video and a really good write-up and get the word out there for people and cover your costs. And people will back it. And I think the main thing is getting people something, something will get people on board. And it can be very, very small somethings, saying hi. There's been people like they will handwrite letters to people. They will do Skype calls with them. They'll do a guitar lesson. There's very creative ways to get money out of people that are not very large costs on the other side.
So Tracy, you are somebody who buys our music, plays our music. What advice do you have for all of us?
I think one of the main things is don't give up. I mean, there's a insane amount of content available, not just online, but in stores everywhere. We're global on an extreme scale. Anybody with an internet connection can upload any kind of content. I think, everybody I play on the show has really great content and is people that should be paid attention to and their music should be bought. I think it's reaching out to people is the biggest thing. I think where people fall down a lot is they don't realize the benefit of talking to people and, reaching out. Somebody, I know, like if I play one of you, you're going to write me back and say, for, this, and you're going to listen to the show and maybe tell somebody else. That is the best way to help even yourself, because there's so many that I'll play and like, they don't say thanks. They don't, post about that they're on any shows or anything. And And later on, I'll see something online, and they'll be like, "Why is nobody paying attention?" And it's like, "Well, you're not.
Right.
If you're not responding to people, then they're not going to pay.
You have to explain what you value in the connections that you make, and if you don't explain what you value, if you just have the connection, it's rather meaningless. From both sides. So this is exactly why, now almost 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, Jeff and I and Kim, this is exactly why we wanted to do Eclectrocasts, is to go beyond just the tweet, but to really interact with the other musicians, the other independent musicians that are out there that pretty much work like us. You see, Jeff is sitting in his bedroom, I'm sitting in a bedroom, and that's how we work, And so we're interested to really connect on a person-to-person basis with other artists. So, you're one of the people that listens to our music, that values our music, and that does something with it. And you buy it, and you play it on air. So, and you do this in a very thoughtful way. So that's exactly why I put, and I know Jeff feels exactly the same way. We put our music out there for people like you. I don't think any of us tries to become famous or well-known. That is not our purpose. Our purpose is to express our art and to have this conversation. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, no, I really, it's more me thanking all of you, because when I started online, it was astounding to me when musicians would talk back, because that's not, and I think, all three of us grew up at a time, you only got to talk to the musicians if you saw them live, and they stuck around after a concert, and, then they're being introduced to, all these people, they're going to remember you. And I think it was one of the things that struck me more about doing the show is I was talking to all these people and talking about their music, and they were saying something back, and I was like, whoa. Because, that you don't really get that feedback when you're on the mainstream level. You get a few. Like, I remember I played Suzanne Vega once, and she actually tweeted a thank you back, and I was like, whoa, but it's not the same type of connection. And that's where I ended up focusing more on independent music, because there is a lot better connection. It's talking to people. And the more you talk to the artists and the musicians and get to know them, the more their music really means. It's like you have all these friends and you're supporting friends. And so it's just incorporating more and more and more friends into the group. And, some people are really, really open to it, and some aren't as much. And like I said, there's no one way to do it. There isn't. There's some people that make really great music and don't really talk to much of anybody, and they do really well. And, so different scenarios work for different people, but it really became, for me, it always humbles me when people like ask me questions or send me comments back, or even when I'm tweeting back and forth with you guys or Kim, and it's either something very funny or just in general, because I remember talking to somebody I work with, because I have a regular job, and I'll talk about, oh yeah, I do this radio show, and they'll say, oh, who do you play? And I'm like, yeah, nobody you've heard of. But when I play stuff, they'll be like, oh, and I think it's when you know people, you're more willing to pay attention. And when I talk about, everybody that I've met online, and be like, oh, I have, my friend's latest album, and I'm going to be playing this. And they'll be like, oh, we'll play your friend's music. And, it's different than me saying, oh, I have the latest XYZ.
And it kind of, is in play. When I was a kid in high school, we would swap LPs. So I would bring an LP, and we would say, you listen to this, and I listen to that. And it's kind of the same idea, It's like, I think you've never heard of this here. You listen to this, and then give me something you think I might enjoy listening to.
Tracy, we're going to ride out on the Trixie Delight Tourmaline Hum track called Frozen. But before we do that, is there anything else that you would like to add in the final minutes of our time together?
One, thanks to both of you for asking me to do this. it was, it was very humbling for me and an honor to, be on the show, because I've been listening since you guys started out, and have had the pleasure of knowing both of you over the past few years, along with Kim and Sarah and many others that welcomed me very kindly into the circle of which I don't, play music. And so I'm always like the non-musician friend over on the side. But it's one of those things where I'll be like, remember, I'm the non-musician person over here. But it's always been very humbling for me to be welcomed into these groups with you guys and with many, many others that, I've become friends with.
That's nice to hear, because I don't think we talk to each other because we're all musicians. I think that's a coincidental thing. I think we talk with each other because we have interesting things to say and interesting things to offer.
Yeah. But even, knowing that people out there who aren't musicians are listening, who just like love music, is very, very comforting to me, as an artist. Yep. Regina. Tracy, there's Emma Nikita, who does the radio show on Radiocast Caribou. And Tom, Tom, of course, Tom Emmons, the Scatterfilter, but Tom's a musician as well, but he's a very, very big music fan. But Rick Rock down in Texas, I mean, there's just so many people, and I'm probably forgetting a lot of people, and I hate doing that, but Tracy, it's so refreshing to know that we're making music for people who love music, not just musicians. And I think that's what it's all really about. Touching thing about it for me.
So we're gonna ride out on Trixie Delight and Tourmaline Hum. You want to take us out? So before you do that, thank you so much for being on our show. It's been fantastic, and it's really nice to be present with you in person. Yes. We've expanded our presence.
Exactly. This track, Frozen, by Trixie Delight, was actually brought out as a single called Sleep. And Tourmaline Hum did a remix off of it, and they're both from the Committee for Sonic Research label. And it's on this wonderful 33.5 record, which is vinyl. So, if you're a vinyl collector, it's on vinyl. I saw that. I really like this song because she's a instrumentalist that happens to sing. And she took, if you listen to the original, it's really good. And when it's another one that I think blends in with the other three songs, and that when it got remixed, it just became something that pulls you in and doesn't let go. And, that's really, nice. It's one of my go-to tracks. And so, so this is Frozen from or Sleep, depending, by Trixie Delight with Tourmaline Hum.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening. Take care.
I've been drifting so long, not blowing the truth from my mind. Sleep, don't trust those pillows, feathers. still not made.